The Eyes of Tammy Faye, which not to be confused with the documentary. There was a documentary that came out 21 years ago. Yeah, same name.
Yeah, have you seen this documentary? I tried to watch it before.
No.
I didn't get time, unfortunately. I wanted to watch it to compare, but I have not seen the film.
I'd like to watch the documentary, but I have never seen it, but I am well aware of it. And I'm so happy that I was able to see this film because I didn't think I was going to be able to. As I mentioned kind of earlier in the show, I wasn't able to see The Eyes of Tammy Faye through the Toronto International Film Festival. It was not available through virtual. However, it did get a release this past week. I think like a wide release. That said, I don't think critics are loving it that much. It's one of those movies. It kind of came out, and I think the knives kind of came out for this one. And it's about two real life people, televangelists, Jim Bakker and Tammy Faye Bakker, played by Andrew Garfield and Jessica Chastain. And I will say, and this is directed by Michael Showalter, who I don't think we haven't talked about him too much on this show. I mean, Wet Hot American Summer, of course. I think the only time we talked about The Big Sick, I know, but I don't think we did talk about The Lovebirds, didn't we?
Yes, The Lovebirds, a terrible film. I would say that's more embarrassing than whenever you
I
felt
like that
of,
movie.
Cry Macho.
I'd watch that over Cry Macho. Yeah, easily.
That's why we're two different people.
Well, there you go. So Michael Showalter, I like Michael Showalter just fine.
I mean, outside of The Lovebirds, I think he's a very talented writer, and I've enjoyed his work as a actor, writer, and to some extent as a filmmaker. Though I think he's been more miss than hit as a director. Outside of, like we said, The Big Sick. And I also like Search Party, what I've seen of it. I know he's directed for that show as well.
Still haven't gotten into that. Yeah, I'd like to, though. Did you like Hello, My Name is Doris? I know we brought it up before.
Oh, yeah, that was a pretty good one. Yeah, I mean, it's not the most memorable or endearing film, but I remember, I think I reviewed it and I saw it and I liked it. And I think I primarily liked it for Sally Field's performance. But yeah, that was a decent film.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if you're listening and you're just like, well, I don't know, I haven't seen all that stuff. He did write Wet Hot American Summer, which I guess is one of his bigger things. But anyway, so The Eyes of Tammy Faye, as I mentioned before, this was one of those movies where I was excited to see it because this one hits home. This one hits personal for me, right? There's stuff that happens in this movie that I'm connected to, and I wasn't there because this movie doesn't take place necessarily, but I was there, kind of
yeah. I was talking to my screening rep before, and I was like, yeah, frankly, it was kind of before my time in the screening. I was like, it was before my time. I was like, yeah, I guess. Yeah. So I'm not, yeah.
But the events of this film are well known to me. I mean, so I want to get this out of the way, right? The setup for this film and the documentary as well, which again, I haven't seen, but I remember when the documentary came out. This movie is about two people who kind of made it big in the televangelism scene, right? Jim Bakker and Tammy Faye Bakker. They get married in the 1960s. They join CBN. They created the 700 Club, which exists to this day through Pat Robertson, something I think a lot more people will probably remember. Now, my parents remember Jim Bakker and Tammy Faye. I know that for sure. They would watch that program or whatever. They were doing that show, I think, from Charlotte, North Carolina, I think, for the longest time, and then eventually California, if I'm not mistaken. But in this movie, Jerry Falwell is portrayed by Vincent D'Onofrio. Now, I got to ask you, Jerry Falwell, do you know anything about this man?
Yeah, I know he was not a great guy.
I mean, even outside of this movie, he's not fondly remembered by a lot of people. Not a lot of people he is, but a lot of people he's not.
Is it true, though, that a lot of the dirt came out after he died?
No.
Okay. Was the stuff coming out before did he die in 2015?
He died in 2007. I was there.
2007? Okay.
I was within a square mile of his death. So
wow.
For listeners who do not know this about me, I attended Jerry Falwell's church for a long, long time. So Jerry Falwell, well-known segregationist and little Puerto Rican John Negroni, kind of grew up in his world, right? My parents moved to Virginia when I was a little kid, okay? Lynchburg, Virginia, which is where his church started. And I don't talk about this on the show that much. I've been saving it, I guess. And a lot of this stuff comes up in the movie. So this is a surreal experience. I mean, watching this movie, I remember so much of this stuff. Mainly because Jerry Falwell, he's kind of the villain of this movie, right? And that tracks. Oh my word, does it track? Will Ashton, I have to tell you, in the 90s and the 2000s, Jim Bakker and Tammy Faye were punchlines for the people in the Jerry Falwell orbit. Like, Jerry Falwell would preach sermons. I remember him talking ill of Jim Bakker. I remember him getting into detail about the gay agenda and if you like the dangers of that sort of thing, right? And he would reference Tammy Faye. He would reference these people who were too nice, or, you know, Jim Bakker's sort of like connections to that community and all this stuff. And they were like a cautionary tale. And impressionable John Negroni growing up in that church, Will, what do you think happened? I grew up not knowing the truth. I grew up thinking all this stuff. And I was telling you about this after I saw the movie, that it wasn't until Jerry Falwell died in 2007. Again, I went to the high school connected to the church. I went to the college, the middle school, the elementary school. I was in that world. You were
indoctrinated into the whole thing.
I was, yes. I played tennis with his grandkids, right?
Oh, geez. I didn't realize it was that. Wow. Okay.
His grandkids, Trey Falwell and Wesley Falwell, two of the worst human beings I've ever met in my entire life.
I was going to cheekily ask if you kept in touch.
Oh, they were the worst. I couldn't stand them. But yes,
even at the time, like when you were like fully indoctrinated, you were not about them. Okay.
Oh, I couldn't stand them, Will Ashton. They were insufferable, and like all this stuff has come out about that family ever since. You're right. But
sure.
The 2015 stuff. You're thinking of. Sorry, you're thinking of his son, Jerry Falwell Jr. Similarly, a terrible human being, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, my familiarity, I think, of the Tammy Faye and Jim Bakker saga, I think, began and ended with the church lady skit from SNL, which somewhat amusingly to me, not prominently, but like somewhat prominently features into the film. Yeah. I just remember that, and I remember the big crying mascara running face, like the big puffy face that was like on shirts and all that stuff with Tammy Faye. And I think that's also the poster for the documentary. I just remember that was like the whole thing I knew about Tammy Faye, was that like she was like, you know, known for like kind of crying and her hysterics and like all these different, you know, outbursts and all this stuff. And like she was like basically kind of like a caricature. Yeah. Or like, you know, like a cartoon. Bag. Yeah, a punching bag. Like, yeah, even outside of your experience with it, like my limited experience is just that like these people are clowns or weirdos, and like Tammy Faye especially, because the 90s, as we know, were not especially kind to women, in particular evangelistic women's. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. We got to mention this. I mean, this also, and this movie posits it. They were sort of that way in the evangelical community as well. Like, as I'm sort of getting to, they were charismatic, right? And so Thomas Road, the church that I went to and all that stuff in Lynchburg, Virginia, that's where I grew up. They were punchlines. I mean, the idea of being charismatic. Jerry Falwell would make jokes all the time about Presbyterians, about Episcopalians and Pentecostals and all this stuff. That was like kind of his thing. He was a pretty miserable man. And I knew him personally. You know, like my parents would have like dinner with him and stuff. And like I met him a bunch of times. And I can't say that I didn't know the guy super well or anything like that. I mean, he was the big mega church pastor, but it was one of those things I didn't realize how famous he was until he died. Like he died, and I remember like people were talking about it on like Fox News and stuff. And I was like, wait, what? Why would they talk about that on, like, people know him?
Why are they talking about Uncle Jerry?
Honestly, like I genuinely did not realize that he was that well known. I thought he was kind of like pretty well known in like the region. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, that kind of thing. But yeah, to see him played by Vincent D'Onofrio in this movie was something else. And I'd say D'Onofrio does a pretty good job, actually. He doesn't nail Jerry Falwell, you know, in terms of like his mannerisms and all that stuff. I mean, it's hard to do. I mean, I think that Jerry he had such a specific personality on screen, like on the old time gospel hour and in his sermons. He was a kind of a different guy in like behind closed doors. And I think that's what D'Onofrio is kind of going after. And
Yes.
I'm kind of impressed by how he avoided, the low hanging fruit of that kind of performance.
Well, I think it's kind of crucial that he does that, right? Because the Andrew Garfield and Jessica Chastain performances are deliberately more self-conscious. They're more about the visual presentation of their characters because they have to kind of fit into a certain mold. Whereas Vincent D'Onofrio has, I think, a little bit more freedom as an actor to kind of play it, as a character, as a human, obviously one that is embittered and willing to sabotage people's career for his own personal well-being, but one that, has more burning resentment, more ties to like a grounded humanity than the heightened buffoonery of our two main characters.
Right. And it absolutely tracks. I mean, people don't know, I guess this isn't public knowledge, but I mean, Jerry Falwell, he bragged about how much of a betrayer he was in general. I mean, the dude, I remember like one of the things he would always bring up is how he literally stole his best friend's fiance, Maisel Falwell or Mabel Falwell, Maisel, I think. Like literally in the 1950s, his best friend was engaged to someone and he convinced her to dump him and ended up marrying her. Like that kind of sets the tone, doesn't it? Like Will Ashton, I can't imagine, like, if you did that to me, I'd be so upset. I wouldn't be able to forgive you.
A little peeved, a little perturbed, I guess, if that happened.
But then literally the guy that he did this to would talk about it, and they were still friends because I don't even know. Like, I mean,
well, that's kind of like the Dick Cheney thing, right? Where he shot the guy in the face and the guy had to apologize for it.
Yeah, there you go. It's exactly like that. But anyway, so this movie is kind of covering a different version of this story. I know I'm getting a little personal with it, but this movie tracks like decades in the life of these two people, these very charismatic preachers, their rise and their fall and everything. And when I was watching this movie, I wasn't very familiar with the critical reception. And I could have sworn, Will, when I watched this is coming out through Searchlight, by the way, I was thinking, oh my word, Jessica Chastain, shoo-in for a nomination here. This is a fantastic performance. I mean, this performance is golden. I mean, I thought it was so well done. She captures a single character through the course of several decades. Every version of the character rings true. And I think that she's so good. She overshadows Garfield in a lot of ways. I think Andrew Garfield, in my opinion, is kind of the weak link of this movie. Not because of the actor. I don't think he's doing a bad job here. I think the script doesn't care about him. And to the film's detriment, it kind of like leaves him kind of high and dry because there are things about him I think the movie fails to explore that would have informed Tammy a little bit better. But no, the film is focused intently on Tammy Faye in this movie. And I think in a good way because Jessica Chastain, this is one of my favorite Jessica Chastain performances in general. I think she's killing it here. But after looking at the critical reception, I don't know if she's even going to get a nomination now, which I think is kind of sad. This is a really good performance, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, the intent of the film is just like, from what I can tell, like I said, I'm far from an expert on the subject, but yeah, I mean, I got the sense that like the general Bakker story was just like Jim Bakker is kind of, the criminal in this, the one that the media went after. And then he had this hysteric wife that sang and did these weird bombastic things. And
this movie's on her side. 100%.
And the documentary, that's why I wanted to watch, because the documentary, I wanted to, for one, have a better understanding of who the real Tammy Faye was, but also I've heard that the documentary, it's trying to sympathize and humanize her, but also there is like kind of like a voyeuristic, carnivalistic quality to the documentary as well, and that like it's like kind of like, look how weird this lady is. Like it's also kind of like taking the piss out of her. I've heard from some people. I don't know. I guess I haven't seen it. And I've heard that this new movie is like, ironically, even more so than documentary, trying to humanize her beyond that and being like, no, you don't understand. Like this lady's been through a lot. Like you don't get to point C without having to go through points B and A.
Yeah, and it positions her as a victim. It's like, she's been victimized her whole life. And, I think this movie has some uplifting messages for a person like that. Like, there's literally a scene in this here that almost made me cry toward the end where she's like befriending some teenagers. And I was like, go you. I don't think this is real. I don't think this has really happened, but still.
Sure. But yeah, I mean, I guess for me, where I find myself a bit mixed on the film, and like I said, I'm not really an expert on the subject or know much about Tammy Faye as a person or as a media figure, but I think the movie is trying to kind of stride this line where it's acknowledging that she is this larger in life, absurd person, but also she has these deep human feelings and that she's been through a lot and she's, ached and had to deal with all these traumas and difficulties and resentments and bitter feelings from other people or herself throughout her life. And I think it's a very, very fine line that has to cross. And I think sometimes it gets it right. And I think a lot of other times it's a tightrope that doesn't quite excel at, or excel, I mean.
I guess, like, I know this movie has some problems. I have some problems with this movie. I think for me, and I just want to go over this really quick. I think the issues with this movie are more about what it leaves out. And that's it. There's a lot going on in this movie. I mean, I think that it's hard to cover it in the runtime, which already was kind of long. I think that it probably was a little bit too long, to be honest. But at the same time, it's over 2 hours. But like, there's so much here. There's so much material. I mean, these people went through so much, and it kind of skips over a lot of stuff. It skips over a lot of stuff like Criminal too, that they got into. And I feel like we're missing the full picture. But I think where I fall on this movie's side 100% because I love Jessica Chastain in this. I think that's what it comes down to. I think that I have been wanting a performance like this from Chastain for a while. I think that her career has kind of suffered setback after setback. I think It Chapter 2, I thought was such a letdown in terms of what we know she's capable of. Miss Sloane and Molly's Game and Interstellar, even something like The Martian, which I thought utilized, her talents to a good degree. She's not the star of that film, really. And I don't think she's a big part of it. I think people remember her a lot for Lawless. They remember her for Zero Dark 30, which is kind of embarrassing in retrospect. This to me feels like the movie that's like, no, Jessica Chastain is a force. And we should, this movie goes through Tammy Faye's young life and has such a difficult job. It starts with this image, this representation of Tammy Faye, the one you know of, right? Who is like permanently make-upped like a person who has all of these insecurities, and it's kind of cringy, you're just sort of like cringing for this person. And then it takes you back in time. It walks you through her as a kid, but then it goes into Chastain. And I kind of likened this movie to being like The Irishman, but for televangelists, the way that it does all the de-aging and I don't think it does CGI de-aging, but it does a lot of like makeup and prosthetic de-aging, which I think is a lot of it really works actually. But we see her, like, she pulls off like a 19-year-old woman, despite being in her 40s, almost perfectly. I bought it. Will, I don't know about you. I guess not. But I mean, I was like so transfixed and immersed in this movie. I didn't feel the runtime because of it. And I think that's Chastain. I think she carries this movie and more. She's Tammy Faye in real life. Tammy Faye carried the whole thing. Underappreciated.
You don't get to complain about 90-year-old Clint Eastwood anymore after that comment.
Whatever. Nope. Not even. She's only in her 40s, though. I mean, if she was a little bit older.
What I mean is that, like, I don't think it's as egregious an age gap. I never bought that she was 19.
We got to differ there. Yeah. I bought it. I was in. I was like, sure.
Yeah, I mean,
it's the acting. Even though she doesn't look it, I think she acts it perfectly, though. That's where I don't really take much issue with her performance. But I think where I guess I differ is that, considering Michael Showalter is a director of the film, I guess I just was expecting something more transgressive or something that was willing to be more provocative or willing to kind of like explore the material in a way that wasn't so narratively linear, or at least so conventional in the way that this movie is, I think, for the most part, because like we mentioned, it's trying to convey a lot in a short amount of time. Yeah,
and I think by doing so,
it's not a set piece kind of movie.
I think it gets its points across, but it does so in, I think, a largely sort of superficial fashion. Like, I think it makes its points. Like, I think where the movie is most interesting to me is where it actually dives into Tammy Faye's relationship with the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
And I think that's the aspect of the film that really should be explored more, because that's the complexity of the character that I find most beguiling, and I think that's where her legacy is primarily at this point. Because and as far as like her like reevaluation as a celebrity figure,
right? She became an icon.
Yeah. Yes. And I think the movie just kind of just like does a lot of, like just like acknowledges it in a pretty prominent scene, maybe one of my favorites from the film, but in a way that just kind of feels like hand waving, just like, oh yeah, we have to acknowledge like this, thing about her. That's, in retrospect, I think maybe one of the more crucial key things, especially for the evangelical community.
I think it's fair to say they thread it through the movie. I mean, the whole movie in general kind of gets into the difficulties and the imbalances between the Baptist world, the more fundamental evangelical world, and the sort of more progressive Christianity. I think where the movie falls short, which I would voice to, is the prosperity gospel aspect of it, which this is not the Joel Osteen era, right? Yes. This is not, but it is the precursor to it. And I think the film kind of pulls its punches on that a little bit. You know what I mean? Like it could have gone a little bit farther on how they sort of set the stage for that. The hypocrisy of it, the sort of like abundance of wealth and how they push people to do certain things. But I kind of blame Andrew Garfield and the writing around his character for that. I think that's where his character is supposed to supplant the movie. And I just don't think he's much of a presence in this. He really falls to the wayside in this movie for some weird reason. And even though I don't get why, it's Andrew Garfield. Let's go.
Yeah, and I guess I take less issue with Andrew Garfield's performance because I think he falls in the same issue that I have with Chastain and Showalter as a filmmaker, which is just that I don't 100% know what their main takeaway is here. I get like broadly speaking, they want to explore Tammy Faye beyond the media headlines, beyond the jokes and the punchlines, and just see her humanity. But like we said, because she's buried under mountains of makeup, because she is like putting on this affectation, because she is trying to live up to the characteristics or the kind of broad aspects of Tammy Faye's character, I just don't, and because the narrative itself is so condensed, that I just don't think those humane moments really get enough time to breathe and shine. And I think that's where the film loses what its core purpose is. And I think that's where more of the like broader SNLS touches kind of come into play, because the performance kind of feels so heightened without some of the kind of more raw, tender moments. And there are some of those, I think, particularly towards the middle, which is where I found the movie, I think, at its most intriguing. But I just think because it doesn't allow itself fully to explore both Tammy Faye or Jim Bakker as people, which I think was the core purpose of the film, that kind of loses its way as it goes along. And I think that's why I wasn't able to fully emotionally connect with the film beyond just kind of the broad strokes of it.
See, yeah, where I totally disagree is I think it gets Tammy Faye down pat. And I think that it totally covers it, to me, I think to the detriment of covering Andrew Garfield and Jim Bakker in general. And I think it does that in a way to sort of like almost salvage her reputation. I liked this movie so much. I really did, man. I was so into it, and I found this whole reimagining of the story.
Yeah, really do.
I know.
I know.
Yeah, God loves this movie. Yeah. But no, like I just remember watching it, and it part of it is because a lot of it's personal to me, and it is fascinating to watch a film that kind of happened in my backyard growing up, that I have a periphery to, that I have an understanding to, and I have my criticisms there for sure. I'm not the most reliable narrator for this kind of movie, but I just don't think we can say enough like good things about how Jessica Chastain really just like centers this movie around such a strong performance. And I get it. It's not going to be for everybody. I think it's for me, it's for Abby Olcese. I know that. Former co-host of the show.
I was curious what she felt about the film.
Sure. I mean, I mean, I think it's for all those, those goofy little kids like us who grew up in church, like the Baptist church. And Will, you were in the Catholic world, I think.
Yes. I'm in Schrader territory there.
Right on. Yeah. And we love you for it.
Need that Catholic guilt.
Whereas this movie is like the Baptist overconfidence, the sort of like think you know everything and then watch your pride get the best of you kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, I'd say if you're a listener and you're just like, well, guys, I haven't seen a lot of movies, and I've seen God's Not Dead and God's Not Dead 2. I don't know what to watch next. Watch this. I think I'll have a good time.
Sure.
I think you'll get something out of it. Honestly, I think people who of like different persuasions than us, religiously and politically, maybe would probably find some interesting material here. So I think in that way, it's not a crowd pleaser, but it's a crowd winner. And in other ways, I'd say. So I go to bat for the eyes of Tammy Faye. I think it's, I was blind, but now I see this movie.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to take anything away from you for enjoying the film, and I wish I had similar high feelings on it. And I think I'll ultimately find it to be an all right film. Like, I think it's competently made, even despite my issues with some of the narrative limitations of the film. But I guess emotionally, the more I think about the film, the more I find myself just wanting. Like, I think it touches on some key things. I think what it does say and comment on Tammy Faye's legacy is interesting, but only to some extent. I find it frustrating that it doesn't fully, I think, reckon with her influence and her media personality in a way that's beyond the kind of just like broad strokes of it. And I think, like you said, if you're looking for a fairly conventional but emotionally earnest film in some respects, I don't think this is going to be disappointing. I guess for me, expecting something, like I said, maybe more transgressive, more willing to explore different territories and take more creative risk, I guess the movie left me wanting in that respect. But I mean, it's not a terrible film or anything like that.
It might even be a great film, depending on who you ask.
Yeah, I do really like The Big Sick.
Much better. You're right. Yeah.
I think Cry Macho has more compelling things to say, but I can respect what you get out of the film, and I hope people like it.
This is such a one for you, one for me kind of thing. If there ever was a week where two films just hit us in totally different ways. Will, what's your guess? What do you think this did on Rotten Tomatoes?
So I saw earlier this week that was at 74%. I don't know. Based on the way you're talking, it sounds like it's lower. So I'm going to say 68%.
Very close. 67%. It's dropping, but not if I have anything to say about it. My review is going to come out soon, and I want to bump it up a decimal point if I can. What about audience score?
Audience score, I'm going to say 62%.
Oh, way off. 80%. And you know why?
Audiences are digging it. Why?
You know why, Will Ashton? It's because audiences they're not listening to the critics. They're not listening to you or me. They know what they want. And what they want is Tammy Faye. And they're having a Tammy Faye kind of day. Yay, hooray.
So you haven't seen Righteous Gemstones, right?
No.
Okay, I really want you to watch Righteous Gemstones after this.
I might someday, maybe in a few years.
It's on HBO. I really like that show, and I think because I like that show so much, I might dislike a little bit Tammy Faye, because I think what that show has to say about the media evangelical families and stuff like that is a lot more interesting and willing to be darker and weirder with it than this film. But that's neither here nor there, I guess.
Cinema score? Do you know the cinema score for this one?
I imagine audiences liked it. Maybe didn't love it. I'll say B.
B+. Okay. You're losing your touch. I think that's...
They like it. They really do.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, I guess.
That's Eyes of Tammy Faye. An easy recommend for me, but yeah, it's not Will Ashton's holy water. That's for sure. I'm using the wrong religiosity for that, but whatever. It's available to watch right now in theaters, and I don't know if it's ever going to come to a streaming service. It's Searchlight, so if so, it would come to Hulu, I suppose.
Yeah.
At some point. But yeah, check it out if you dare. It's over 126 minutes long. Thank you so much for listening to our show. Be sure to subscribe to Cinemaholics on your favorite podcast app of choice, or find us on YouTube. See you all next time.